keys are to the glory days at the stick. From who's got it better than us to brick by brick. It's always the 49ers way, from off-season to game day. Yeah, we talk back. It's the 49ers Cutback.
It's 49ers Cutback podcast time. Welcome to the show, everyone. Excited to talk about drafting starters, because that's what you're trying to do, is find starters in this NFL draft that you can go ahead and locate, select, and then put in place. And the 49ers don't normally come into the draft with potentially so many needs. Most of the time, they've kind of filled this thing out during free agency and are looking to apply depth. Yeah, you might have the guy that they draft that is getting ready to take over for a certain position, right? Dominic Pooney potentially coming in and eventually taking over for Aaron Banks. We know that he had to end up playing right guard, but they did this before. Laken Tomlinson was the incumbent when they drafted Aaron Banks. Renardo Green, so that way you would be able to move on from Charvarius Ward, Jair Brown, and Malik Mustafa, so you can move on from Hufanga. There are considerations that you do each year as you prepare potentially for players to move on. But I'm not sure we've seen the 49ers roster look like it is right now going into the draft. And it doesn't mean they're not going to fill this thing out with some really superb football players. They're not going to strike in the draft. John Lynch said they have a plan and that they're going to institute that plan. And why not, right? This is a draft that if you're weak in several positions, this is the draft for it. If you said, hey, we need defensive linemen, this is a great draft to need defensive linemen. You need an edge defender, this is a great draft to need an edge defender. There's good edge defenders early on in this draft. You need depth at certain positions, linebacker, corner. You can find those in mid-round. So this is a very good draft if you're looking to rebuild, but I'm not sure the 49ers are rebuilding. I think they're just reloading. That is what their point of emphasis is. But doing that and having a plan for the draft, and yeah, you could always wait after the draft. You didn't address a couple of needs. There's going to be some free agents available that no longer count against your compensatory formula that you can go ahead and get at several positions. I expect the 49ers to probably address that. I wouldn't be shocked to see the 49ers pull off a trade here or there to potentially facilitate adding more depth at certain positions and getting key players that they're looking for. But I thought it'd be an interesting conversation to look at the 49ers roster. We know what their weaknesses are when it comes to starters and what positions they need to find starters at, and then look at the threshold in the draft where they can actually locate starters. Because there's not always going to be a George Kittle in round 5. And if there is a George Kittle in round 5, how quickly is he starting? Right? He was able to start on a team that needed a lot of work in 2017. This is not that. This is not a rebuilding roster, right? So there's not going to be as many opportunities. So you have to find the opportunity for these players to start. But what's the realistic threshold to find a player at each position of need might help you determine where you have to address certain positions. You can't wait until the end of the draft to address edge rusher. That guy's not going to get on the field. That guy's not a starter. In fact, that guy's probably not better than Okawanu or Robert Beal Jr. So you've got to make sure that you know what the thresholds are so you don't miss out on key positions. So that's what we're going to go through. I'm excited about this one. It's going to be a fun process. Like always, leave your comments down in the comment section down below. I do read them as many times as I can. I try to comment back. If you have questions, I'm going to be doing a question video coming up where you can ask whatever you want. I made a post as well on YouTube. Go leave a question or leave it in the comment section, and I'll answer it on a future episode, especially about the draft. I'm going to try to get one of those out here pretty quick. I think it would be fun to answer all your questions. And trust me, I love having the discourse. I love having the conversation. If you disagree with me, that's fine. Everyone's going to see it a different way. I see it my way, and I'm not apologizing for how I see it either. So we all have that about us, so I appreciate it. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. You're listening audio platform 49ers Cutback on Belief Network. Please give it a 5-star rating. So let's get right into this. One thing we know about the 49ers is they need defensive tackles. Defensive tackle has to be the most pressing need for the San Francisco 49ers. And it got more pressing when they moved on from Malik Collins. But it was already a need once they decided they were moving on from Javon Hargrave. Once we saw how difficult it was to stop the run consistently in 2024, it was going to be a point of emphasis for the 49ers. So we knew it was already going to be something big. And luckily, this is one of those drafts that is going to present a lot of players that could potentially step in. Now, because of the types of players and the threshold of the players currently on the roster, like Jordan Elliott is not a starter in my opinion. Kevin Givens is not a starting defensive tackle in my opinion. Evan Anderson, not really a starting defensive tackle. I like Evan Anderson. I think he's going to develop into a solid one-tech defensive tackle for the 49ers. And he could be a potential early down starter, maybe next year, maybe this year, depending on Ed. I don't want to, not give him the opportunity to do it because he could. From what I saw growth wise, I think there's still more growth that needs to happen there. So what does it take? Probably not a big threshold. You can probably get some guys later on in this draft that could potentially come in and start. But as you go through the draft, you start getting less complete defensive tackles. So I think that the threshold for defensive tackles is going to be around late 3, early 4, kind of right in that region where the 49ers pick. So they pick 100 and they pick 113. I think somewhere in that area is probably where it starts falling off the cliff about finding a starter. Doesn't mean you can't find capable players that can help in a rotation. But we're looking for guys who can start that are going to make your team better than what Jordan Elliott would do as a starter, or what you would get from Evan Anderson, or what you would get from Kevin Givens. Like, that is the overall process that you're trying to figure out. So what are some of those names? And I'll mention some of the names at each position as we go through too, that are going to be in that range where the cutoff happens, right? Everyone's heard all the other names. I mean, the guys like TJ Sanders, Darius Alexander, all those guys are third-round picks. Those guys are definitely, worth it. Those guys can all start. Omar Norman-Lott, one of the best pass-rushing defensive tackles in this draft. I think him and Aeneas Peebles are different-level pass rushers. I love those guys. So the guys that we're talking about, kind of in that range, that late 3, early 4, is going to be guys like Shamar Turner out of Texas A&M, and he's dealing with a little bit of an injury, but he's a guy that could step in and potentially start because of his intensity, his disruptiveness, the things like that. I think it's a little bit tougher for him to beat out a guy like Kevin Givens, who has more experience. I think Shamar Turner has more upside. But just to give an example, 6'3", 290 pounds, disruptive and versatile is the key. You get a big body like Deion Walker. I don't love Deion Walker in this draft. I like Alfred Collins a lot more. Right? I like Tyleik Williams, Kenneth Grant, CJ West. And CJ West is another guy in this range. Would be a dynamite one-tech, a 2-down guy with a lot of upside. Deion Walker's kind of in that category. For me, Deion Walker would be more of a 4th-round pick because he plays so tall. I mean, massive man. But just an example of somebody potentially in this range. Joshua Farmer, CJ West, Jordan Phillips, Jamari Caldwell, all would be names in that late 3, early 4 that you could get. Now, as you can kind of go through this, Shamar Turner is a 3-tech. Josh Farmer is a 3-tech. All the other guys are 1-techs. So your threshold for 1-tech might be a little bit later, right? When you can get Jordan Phillips and Jamari Caldwell and JJ Pegues, those guys you might be able to get potentially in round 4, late round 4, 138. You could probably get one of those guys and fill in at the 1-tech. For the 3-tech, it makes it a little bit more difficult. Now, depending on where Aeneas Peebles goes, I expect him to go somewhere in the 4th round. He's definitely probably a designated pass rusher, especially early on in his career. He's got needs a lot more development when it comes to stopping the run. But guys like him later on, and Elijah Roberts, who the 49ers had come in for a 30 visit, who they're super high on, who's going to be an undersized defensive tackle. He's a D-end at SMU, but he's got versatility to play inside. I think they see him as a athletic 3-tech, kind of in the same way they see Aeneas Peebles, who they met with, Omar Norman-Lott, who they had a 30 visit with. So I think it's a little bit more difficult to get a starting defensive tackle at the 3-tech position later than it is a 1-tech. So 1-tech, you could probably go, to pick 138. Or 3-tech, it's probably into the 3rd round is probably the basement for that, right? That's the longest you can wait. So getting those guys, you're going to have to get them, in your first 5 picks. You have to make sure you address your 3-tech position, and you probably need at least one, potentially 2. Since you have Evan Anderson, you probably need another guy. And if you want Jordan Elliott to play the 1-tech, you're definitely going to have to address 3-tech, that is for sure. Excuse me. Now, when it comes to defensive end, You need one for sure. And you would love to get an impact starter. You let go Leonard Floyd. You've got Nick Bosa. You've got Yetur Gross-Matos. But behind him, you got Sam Okawanu. You got Robert Beal Jr. Okawanu wasn't as good against the run down the stretch, I think, as they were hoping he would be. But they like him, and he showed some upside when it comes to pass rush. And then when you look at Robert Beal Jr., he was really good against the run, but hasn't really showed the upside pass rush-wise, which is shocking because they drafted him because of his GTFO, and he was able to get off the ball really quickly. So they're trying to figure out what to do there. We have no idea what we're getting from Drake Jackson. We're just going to put him aside. They need at least one defensive end in this draft. And the way that they've been meeting with players at the top 30 for defensive end, right? They've met with James Pierce. They met with Mike Green. They met with Michael Williams. They've met with Jalen Walker. They just are meeting with all the guys towards the beginning of this draft, looking for a elite defensive end. Now, they did meet with Landon Jackson. They met with him as well. He's probably going to be a second rounder. So they are doing their due diligence when it comes to defensive end. And I think they have to, because I think the threshold for defensive end could be more early round 3. I think when you look at the edge department, there's some really talented guys early, right? I mean, they're not going to touch Abdul Carter, of course. We heard rumors potentially they're trying to trade up in the top 6. The only way that makes sense, right, is if Abdul Carter, for whatever reasons, falls to 6. He's not expecting that. He turned down every single 30 visit that wasn't for a team outside the top 4. So he's expecting to go top 4. Shamar Stewart, they had a 30 visit with. I think that one, we get an understanding of. So as we're getting through, you got Nick Scorton at the end of round 1, right? James Pierce could fall to 2. Donovan Ezeraku, another guy I'm sure they would like. If you like Mike Green, you like Donovan Ezeraku. They're similar. Now, they're not the same, but they're similar. And so you can kind of talk about that. So where does it kind of fall off? Well, JT Tuimoloau, I think he's a starter at the next level. I think Princely Uman-Mielen, he could start early. I don't know if he beats out Yetur Gross-Matos, and I know there's a lot of hate for Gross-Matos. Go back and watch him at Carolina in 2023. That will help you give an idea of what he looked like pre-injury. He dealt with an injury which crippled him for most of the first part of the year as far as production, right? He was out in preseason, the end of preseason, out for the first part of the year. He tried to come back, didn't work. Later on in the season, he started getting production, got over 4 sacks. So I don't know if Uman-Mielen could start over him. Same with Olufemi Oladejo, too developmental. I think a guy like Ashton Gelati would be extremely interesting. And this is kind of the category and the area where I'm looking at to say, okay, round 3, when you're talking Braden Swinson, Ashton Gelati, Josiah Stewart, Jordan Birch, Kyle Kennard, and Jack Sawyer. Those are the guys, in no particular order. Those are the guys where the threshold happens, right? So if you could get somebody, and this is the tough part, you have to get the defensive tackles, you have to get the defensive end, at least one in this category. And they're all really good. They're all good at setting the edge. Ashton Gelati had the best pass win rate out of all these guys that we're talking about. Dude was phenomenal. So when you're talking about a guy that consistently wins, Ashton Gelati is one of those guys if you're looking for pass rush. Kyle Kennard was phenomenal in the SEC, one of the best pass rushers. Jordan Birch, that's a great edge at Oregon. That's a big physical defensive end. I think his speed's a concern, right? He's ran a 4.8. That's going to concern a lot of people. And then you talk Jack Sawyer. And I don't know why some people have Jack Sawyer falling really deep in the draft. I think Jack Sawyer is going to be a day 2 pick. I think a lot of people look at him and, yeah, the skill set, right, when you're talking athleticism, it doesn't jump off the screen. But when you look at production, right, he's the anti-Shamar Stewart. This guy doesn't have all the athleticism, doesn't have all the elite traits. He just wins. He's just a football player. That's what he does. So it's interesting to see the difference, but I think that's a threshold for defensive end would be that 3rd round. I think after that, you're not going to find a starter. I think you're going to find some really good depth pieces, right? Q Robinson with the speed off the edge, potentially Antoine Powell-Ryland, who I like a lot. I think he's a good pass rusher, pretty good setting the edge against the run too. 16 sacks in the ACC last year for Virginia Tech. Jared Ivey as well, a part of that Ole Miss group. But those are guys that are more depth pieces that could eventually develop into something. They're not day 1 starters. So there's a threshold for edge rush, which I think is in the 3rd round, to potentially find one of those starters. And I think, a guy like Jack Sawyer is probably more likely to start than probably a guy like Jordan Birch, who I think would have to work his way and would be a solid run defender and then could develop a little bit when it came to pass. Now, the next position I'm going to talk about is linebacker, because you've got to come up with potentially 2 linebackers. So you lose Dre Greenlaw. D. Winters was somewhat effective last year, deal with a lot of injuries, really good in coverage, not great when it came to stopping the run. And that is a big concern for the 49ers. We talked about it with defensive tackle, defensive end. One of the things they're going to focus on is stopping the run. So you have to potentially fill 2 spots. Now, what are your feelings on D. Winters? And I love the comments of people saying, hey, shouldn't they have already felt comfortable with D. Winters, by now? Like, they should have a pretty good idea. I'll say this about D. Winters. When it comes to coverage, it's one of the keys. And you are running primarily a 4-2-5 for the most part, because most teams are not playing their base downs or base sets. They're playing 70% of the time nickel, which means that's something D. Winters is good at. The problem is he needs to be more effective stopping the run. So he's got to figure it out. But we also have to address, when we're in base 4-3, having a linebacker that can help stop the run who's not inept when it comes to playing in coverage. Because if we were just talking about a dude that could step in and stuff the run, Tatum Bethune would be a perfect option for the 49ers. The dude plays against the run really well. I think next year he'll even have a better feel for it. The problem is in coverage right now, he's a liability. Now, I seen some growth in him last year. He made a couple of plays down the stretch. I think that's going to build his confidence. Maybe he's figuring out what exactly he's supposed to do. But we are going to have a subtle change in responsibilities for linebacker under Robert Saleh. A little bit of a different coverage scheme. So that's going to play into it. So we have to potentially line up 2 guys. What is the threshold? Well, I think it's different for each position. Your will linebacker has to be able to cover, but also be able to stop the run. And finding a guy that can do both consistently is difficult. You could easily address this with Jihad Campbell, wipe your hands in round 1 and say, hey, we got the replacement for Dre Greenlaw. He's going to play 70% of the snaps. D. Winters can go back to playing Sam. We feel good about it. We'll take late round linebacker, see what we could develop. We got some young guys we like. But are you going to draft a linebacker that high? I seriously doubt it, even though I love Jihad Campbell. I would be convicted if I was a GM to draft Jihad Campbell if I had a linebacker need. I just think he's that good. So where exactly do you look for Will? Well, I think it's round 3. Round 3 is kind of the threshold to where you're going to be able to find a starter that can start at will linebacker. Because I think once you get past guys, like Carson Schlesinger, who's probably going to go in round 2 and maybe even late round 1, the way he's jumping up boards, Barrett Carter, Chris Paul, Demetrius Knight. I think those guys are the end of your starting group. And that's why I do think they're probably going to go closer to the beginning of the 3rd round is probably the threshold to find your starting will linebacker. I think you can find guys that can come in and compete. I just don't know if you're going to find someone that's going to beat out D. Winters with 2 years under his belt and extreme athleticism. So I think that's the spot for Will. Now, when looking for a Sam linebacker, because they can have less responsibilities when it comes to the pass, they're more so playing the run. I think it's later on. I think you can go get a guy at the end of round 4 or in round 5. There's some guys that are going to be great in that area. Now, I know a lot of people don't like Danny Stutzman. I think he's one of the best run defending linebackers in this draft. So he would be on my short list, especially if he's going to play Sam. I think he'd be a dynamite Sam linebacker who would help stop the run. Teddy Buchanan, another freak athlete guy, but also can tackle over 100 tackles. I like him in this category. Jay Higgins, linebacker, Iowa. I think he would also make sense. He's very good and astute when it comes to paying attention to what he sees. So I think that would be the threshold. So you're talking round 3 for will linebacker, and that's probably early round 3 if you're going to get a guy that could potentially start over D. Winters. If you're looking for someone to just come in and compete and potentially land at Sam linebacker, maybe even your will linebacker of the future, I think it's going to be late 4, early 5. Kind of the Dre Greenlaw area, exactly where you got him before. And there are some really fun guys later on in this draft as well, that are speed guys you could get later and potentially develop a guy like Carson Bruner, out of Washington, Jalen Walker, not Jalon Walker, Chandler Martin. I think he's a lot of fun as well. Kane Madrano, who the 49ers did a 30 visit with, who is Schlesinger's teammate over at UCLA. Those guys you could all get late that could potentially develop. But if you want starters, it's going to be round 3 for Will and round 5 potentially for Sam linebacker. Now, cornerback, because they play 70% of the time, you need to find a third cornerback. If you're looking at the 49ers depth chart right now, Trey Brown would be coming in and starting in those situations. And the guys competing with him are Trey Avery, Darrell Luter Jr., we haven't saw a lot from, Trey Tomlinson, who they picked up off waivers. There's not a lot of depth at the position. You look at some of the nickel corners, they did bring in Ciaran Neal, and they have Chase Lucas from last year, but they need help at cornerback in a big way. To get a starter, I don't think it's going to take somebody that has to be early rounds, because beating out Trey Brown is not going to be as difficult as potentially others. Kind of like when you look at defensive tackle. I don't see Trey Brown as a consistent starter. So finding somebody, they could go cornerback early. If they went cornerback early, I think that guy steps in day one, right? And backs up Renardo Green and Deommodore Lenoir. So when I'm looking at it this way, I'm looking at 3 corners being starters because of how much you play nickel in your 4-2-5. So, second round is a hotbed of talent where you could really get some studs to potentially step in, that you don't have to use too much draft capital on, potentially pick 43. I think that's the best place to find a starter because there's so many good guys. Siobhan Revell, Benjamin Morrison, Trey Amos, who out of my guys, this is my favorite out of the bunch in that second round. Azare Thomas, love Florida State, love Azare Thomas, but I would take Amos over him. Maxwell Hairston, the speedster, and then Darian Porter, kind of in that pick 75 range, potentially. I love him at pick 75 for the 49ers. Now, with this, I don't believe the 49ers have to get somebody in round 3 or they're not going to have a starter that can step in ahead of Trey Brown. I think they can go into round 4 potentially. In round 4 is another really good group of guys potentially that are going to be there. Dorian Strong, who late 3, early 4, zone corner from Virginia Tech. Kobe Bryant, who they met with, like him a lot. Jacob Parrish out of Kansas State. I'm sure you've heard a lot of Jacob Parrish, solid athlete, physical, might be more of a nickel. We'll see, though. He competes on the outside. Quincy Riley, who's been one of my favorites through the process. And then Noel Williams. They have met with guys later on that are going to come out, in this draft, later on in the draft, that potentially could be more depth. They met with Elijah Huzzy. I'm a big fan of Roger Longerbeam. So those are some guys. Nico Reed from Oregon was at their local pro day. So there are some guys for sure they could go. But I think the threshold is going to be in that 4th round to have a guy that could start over Trey Brown and step in. For depth, you could go a long ways. I think rounds 5, round 6, round 7, there'll be more depth that could potentially push a guy like Darrell Luter Jr. and kind of fill out this. And I don't want to count out Trey Tomlinson. I think there's a chance that he could come in and compete and win over a starting job. I know everyone's looking at Trey Brown, but Tomlinson was very highly touted coming out of TCU, and I think he's very talented and has potential. Let's talk about offensive line, and let's talk about guard. And guard is interesting because you have Ben Bartch right now stepping in. But you don't want to go into the season just thinking it's going to be Ben Bartch or Nick Zakelj. You need to bring in competition. John Lynch said it at the owners' meetings. We need to get a guy. Now, would I love the 49ers to get one of the top interior offensive linemen in this draft? Would I love for them to get Donovan Jackson, who's my favorite interior offensive lineman in this draft? Absolutely. He's a day one plug-and-play starter. What does it take, and who does it take to potentially start over Ben Bartch? I think Jonah Savahi-Naya at Arizona would start over him. I think Wyatt Millum would have a real good chance of starting over him. Tate Ratledge. I think those guys are for sure. Here's where it gets interesting. Dylan Fairchild, Miles Frazier in late round 3, early round 4, I think could come in and compete. I think this is where you're starting to find your threshold is round 4. And there's going to be some guys that I like that are offensive tackles that could potentially move inside to guard that I think the 49ers could get in round 4. That would make a lot of sense. A guy like Logan Brown, I think he would make a lot of sense. I think early you could move Anthony Belton inside to guard, and I think he would do a great job. He's probably going to go in round 3. And then I got to mention my guy Jack Nelson, because even though most people are putting him in round 5, round 6 in their rankings as far as offensive tackle, I think he could go as early as round 4 as an interior offensive lineman. So I think it's got to be the threshold to find a starter at guard in round 4. These guys got to be able to beat out Ben Bartch, Spencer Burford, Nick Zakelj, and I think this is kind of the area that you get it. Jack Nelson, Anthony Belton, who's going to play left tackle in the NFL at some point, but playing him at left guard early with that big physicality, nickname Escalade. Anytime a guy like that you start thinking about how much you potentially like them playing in the system. And so I think that those guys make sense. And when you're talking about pure interior offensive linemen, early round 4, I think that's kind of where you go. I mean, Jackson Slater, Miles Frazier, Dylan Fairchild, Tate Ratledge, all those guys potentially late round 2, through round 3 into early round 4 could be a hot spot. If you decide to use pick 43, if for whatever reason Donovan Jackson is on the board, absolutely draft him. I'm just telling you, that dude is a plug-and-play left guard. He beats out Ben Bartch day 1. You're set. Jonas Savahi-Naya, I like him a lot. I think he could do it as well. So guard, that's where I'm saying. I think guard is, kind of in that middle round 4. Maybe you could get Jack Nelson in round 5. I think that would kind of be the end. Now, offensive tackle, and you have the premier offensive tackle in the league in Trent Williams, and then you have Colton McKivitz, who, depending on who you are, like him or dislike him. But I think Chris Foerster likes him. And so that's what I'm going to go with, that thought process. It doesn't matter what I say. It matters what Chris Foerster says. And he likes Colton McKivitz. And I will say, Colton McKivitz got a lot better from year 1 as a starter to year 2 as a starter. He definitely did. There's still a lot of growth that needs to happen there. But what would it take when you draft an offensive tackle to start over Colton McKivitz? I think that's the question. I think the fact that they like him so much, it's probably going to take a lot to start over him. I think any of the guys you would get in the first round could potentially beat him out. Campbell, Membu, Banks, Simmons. They did have a 30 visit with both Banks and Simmons. To me, those guys make sense. I think it gets real interesting with another 30 visit guy in Marcus Bow, who they met with. He's got a shot as well, but I think the versatility of Bow might mean the 49ers are looking at him at interior offensive line because he has the potential to play center or guard. I worry about his anchor a little bit playing guard, but center, he might be able to do it. Arianti Ursary, Josh Connerly, all would make sense. I think where you find that area is right there with Marcus Bow. Maybe Emory Jones. I think after that, the other guys, I don't think could beat him out, right? Cameron Williams, I don't think he could beat out Colt McKivitz. Charles Grant, too much development there. Logan Brown, I don't think so. They would be nice swing tackles. Anthony Belton, maybe. But I think the threshold is right there at the end of round 2, early round 3, where Marcus Bow will potentially come off the board. And so I think that if you're looking for a starter at offensive tackle, it has to be super early. So if you're looking to upgrade the position, that's where you're going to go at offensive tackle. With swing tackle, you could go a lot later. And I think that, we do have to address swing tackle in this draft. And I think that any of those guys that I just talked about would be kind of perfect for it. Cameron Williams, I know a lot of people don't like Cameron Williams. I love him as an interior offensive lineman moving to guard. I do think he still got upside because of his athleticism and size at over 330 pounds to play offensive tackle. I think he needs to get a little bit better. He's a waist spender. There's some things he needs to get better at. I'm not going to do a full breakdown on this episode, but definitely some things he can get better at. Logan Brown, Chase Lunt. Chase Lunt is the prototypical 49ers zone scheme offensive tackle, 6'7", runs like the wind, really great in space, one of the best cutting off backside pursuit in the outside zone scheme that I've seen in this draft. He's phenomenal. Belton, Jalen Travis, Ajani Cornelius, all those guys would make a lot of sense as a swing tackle. You can get those guys all the way into round 5, so you don't have to address it early. There might even be some guys in round 6 you could potentially go with. A guy like Carson Venson out of Alabama A&M, Trey Windig out of Indiana, Gerard Christian Lichtenham out of Oregon State. All those guys later on in this draft as swing tackle potential targets. So swing tackle, you don't have to address early. Now, wide receiver. Brandon Ayuk is going to be out for a little bit. And when you look at the 49ers depth chart, they've got some talent at wide receiver still, right? Ricky Pearsall, Jawan Jennings, they're going to be getting it done. Jacob Cowling, we'll see what he ends up being. They signed Demarcus Robinson. I have faith in him, but he might be suspended for 2 games. Isaiah Hodgins, Russell Gage, veteran guys that they've brought in. I like both of those guys. Gage played for Kyle before. Isaiah Hodgins, I think, takes over the Conley role. And so you've got a big body receiver there. Trent Taylor also there. But when you look at guys like Tariq Owens, I don't know what we're going to get out of him. And I think with Ayuk potentially being out and then the suspension to Demarcus Robinson, if the 49ers are going to find a starter, they might have to go early in this draft to find a starter at wide receiver. And nobody wants the 49ers to go early at wide receiver because we want other positions addressed, right? You need 2 defensive tackles. So we've talked about thresholds for defensive tackle. We need an edge rusher. Thresholds are early on in this draft. Linebacker, same sort of thing. So what is a threshold to start at wide receiver for the 49ers? Well, I think honestly to start over, in a 3 receiver set with Jawan Jennings and Ricky Pearsall early, it's going to take somebody early on in this draft. It might even be round 2. There's a guy here or there that maybe kind of leaks through, but they have to have a different skill set. They have to be a true X to not have Jawan Jennings playing X, and they got to be able to translate well. Those are guys like Trey Harris, Jalen Noel, Jalen Royals, Jaden Higgins, right? All those guys right there are all going to be day 2 picks. You would have to address it at pick 43 or potentially pick 75. You could go get a guy like Alec Aomanor, potentially a Torrey Horton, those guys in round 3 as X receivers. But a lot of the other guys aren't pure X's. Guys like Kyle Williams or Jack Betch, those guys, Luther Burden, he's more of a Z receiver. If you went real early, yeah, you could get McMillan or a Golden or a Buka. I don't think that those guys are going to be in the 49ers even, wheelhouse. They're not even going to look at those guys. So I think if you're going to get a guy that could start at X in this draft, you're looking no later than pick 75. And that's just what you have to do if you're going to get a wide receiver early. That is the threshold. And then tight ends. We don't need a tight end to start. We got George Kittle. And, I just wanted to go over the threshold at the position because you do have Luke Farrell, who is the blocking tight end. Braden Willis, you got him in round 7, and he hasn't really developed. Jake Tunges, you signed 2 years ago to your practice squad. Last year, he made the 53-man roster. Then you got Mason Pline, the undrafted free agent. I think the 49ers need to address move tight end. So where's the threshold to kind of find that guy? Well, there's a lot of really good tight ends in this draft. And I think if you're looking for a guy that's going to make an impact early, you're probably talking round 4. That's when guys potentially, hot spots for like Elijah Arroyo, Terrence Ferguson. I think that's kind of where they go. And then maybe after that, later on in day 3, there's a couple of tight ends you like, that are more developmental. Jalen Conyers, I think he's a potential guy that you could get late. Benjamin Yorosek, same sort of thing. Guy that you could potentially get late. Rivaldo Fairweather, they met with early on in the process. Very athletic tight end. But I think if you really want to get a good tight end that could pretty much develop into somebody that can be consistent with George Kittle and present some problems in 12 personnel, I think it has to happen in round 3/round 4. Where you get Harold Fannin Jr. potentially coming off the board, Gunnar Helm out of Texas, Elijah Arroyo from Miami, Terrence Ferguson from Oregon, who, if you listen to the channel, he's one of my favorites. And then potentially, guys in round 4 like Oronde Gadsden. I think that's kind of the hot spot to get one of those key players. These are thresholds, that you could potentially locate these guys. So lots of information. But I think it gives us a clear guide of positions they need to kind of address earlier on in this draft and positions they can wait on a little bit. And so when thinking about how the 49ers are going to attack the draft and what their plan is, taking thresholds into consideration is huge. Position of need, where the guys you draft could start over players you have. And yeah, you always want to improve positions. But one of the things you have to do too is make sure you got guys that are going to be plus competitors. And I think that's what the 49ers are going to try to do. And we're all building towards this NFL draft next week. It's going to be a lot of fun. And if you are looking to go to a draft party and check it out, come check out the 49ers Rush Road Trip Draft Party. It's going to be in San Francisco at Broadway Studios. And Diameter Lenore, the hyena, is going to be, not the cheetah, the hyena is going to be joining us for that. John Chapman puts on a great event with his Rush Road Trip crew. And Diameter North's coming out. So if you want to do that, there's going to be raffles, giveaways, all that stuff. Kids 12 and under get in free with a paid adult. Come in, let the kids come enjoy the party. It's going to be a lot of fun. And then on day 2, I'm going to be broadcasting with John Chapman and with his buddy Chuck. We're going to kind of rotate through, and we're going to be talking the draft party. And if you love 49ers draft, you're going to love this. So come check it out. Broadway Studios. Tickets are available on 49ersrushroadtrip.com. $20 a piece, so not too expensive. Come in, enjoy it, spend time with the faithful as we get to enjoy the 49ers draft time. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I really appreciate it. If you're listening audio platform, 49ers Cutback on Believe Network, please give it a 5-star rating. And I'll catch you guys in the next one. Until then, stay safe. Remember, the right way is always the 49ers way.